Hello, and welcome to the Hero Report podcast. My name is Ari Cohen, and I'm a professor of political science at the University of Nebraska. With me, as always, Matt Langdon of the Hero Construction Company, coming to us live from Michigan. Matt, how have you been?
Well, right now I'm feeling like someone who's traveled backwards 14 time zones and took 36 hours to do it. But before that, I was doing well in the almost internet-free land of Australia.
Yes, I should tell everyone. We're back from a long hiatus. I'm sure you missed us. We attempted to record a hero report from down under when Matt was off vacationing, jet setting in Australia, but unfortunately, as far as we could tell, koala bears chewed on the one wire that connects Australia to the rest of the world, and our internet went down halfway through our discussion, never to be restored. Apparently that didn't concern any Australians that were around, though Matt and I were a bit surprised that the internet turns itself off at 9 p.m. Or whatever else might have happened. So that we'll refer to from now on as the Lost Hero Report. It's gone, but we sure said some interesting things in that first half hour, and maybe someday it'll be found by our engineers and technicians, and we'll be able to reconstruct it and provide it to all of you. But in the meantime, Matt is back on terra firma. He's back in the United States, where generally internet connectivity is a given. For people who like to listen to or record the Hero Report podcast. So here we are. We're glad to have you back, Matt. It's been a long 3 weeks. I've had to talk about heroism with myself here in my office, so I'm glad to have someone on the other end now.
Good, good. Well, as an aficionado of Australian animals, I'm sure you're happy to be corrected that it's just a koala, not a koala bear.
Yeah, but I'm an American, so I won't listen for a minute to your correction.
Right.
I will say though, our zoo here in Omaha, we have a wallaby that you can see sometimes. I like to go and look at that wallaby, especially while you're in Australia. I feel like I'm communing with you. In that. That is the only such animal here in the Omaha Zoo, sadly. But maybe someday kangaroos, dingoes, even koalas. We could put them in the bear exhibit with all of their cousins. Now, Matt, before we get too far off track, I see you're wearing a black T-shirt today. Maybe you could carefully show us, for those who are watching the podcast rather than listening to it, maybe you could show us what your T-shirt says.
I will, and I'm not sure if it's going to be backwards or not. It looks forward.
Perfect. Yeah, it's great.
It says Hero on Duty, and it's the sort of limited edition Hero Roundtable T-shirt that came in the day after I got back, actually, yesterday. So it is, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it at this point. I'm giving it to all the speakers that are coming to the conference, and then the leftovers will probably go on sale from the website. It's a pretty cool shirt, I have to say.
And I've already checked, loyal listeners, you cannot get a version, an even more limited edition version that says off-duty, because, of course, there is no such thing.
Exactly right. And so that's a good segue into our discussion today, right?
Yes, that's exactly what we'll talk about today, off-duty heroism. No, in truth, what we wanted to talk about today is a topic that we find ourselves talking about with some regularity, but each time we do, I think that it sheds a little bit more light on the project that you and I are both committed to, Matt, and that, in fact, a lot of the Hero Roundtable speakers are committed to, and that I've been blogging about now ad nauseum. That is the topic of defining heroism and figuring out exactly what it is we mean when we talk about heroism. So I think that that's really enough for me to say here at the start. I know that you've been reading a lot, and I know that you have some examples that you want to break out and see where they take us. So let me turn it over to you and kick it off for us.
Well, one of the things we were going to talk about on our episode 57.5 was the. I know there was more than one, but there was one particularly that was called out. Staff members on the plane that crashed in San Francisco. She was noteworthy for having carried passengers out and running back into the burning plane to get more people. And I think there's lots of ways to go from that woman, and one is duty-bound heroism. And is there really a duty in duty-bound heroism? One of the stories I think I've shared before on the show, that I love this story about the Oceanus cruise liner off the coast of South Africa that sunk, and the entire crew jumped on the lifeboats and sailed away before they'd told any of the passengers that the boat was sinking. So clearly, that you may have a duty, but it's not a guarantee that you're going to follow through. So I think that's an important point, especially. I know you posted something today about not all soldiers are heroes. I think that it's an important consideration when we're talking about the duty involved in some professions. But so the question I think I want to look at today is this combination of the environment, the person or people that are involved, that all lead to a heroic act happening. And again, I saw a video, and I think I posted it yesterday on Facebook and Twitter, of a military guy in DC who jumped onto the subway tracks to save a guy in an electric wheelchair who'd fallen down. And so you look at that, and there's clearly bystanders, as we always see, but this guy at this time in this situation did something, and then others jumped in as well. So you've got to, what is it about that person? What is it about that situation? That's where I'd like to go today a little bit.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if this is sort of where I'll start. Let's see where I go with this. It seems to me to use the example of the people on that flight, was it Asiana? Was that the flight in San Francisco? Yeah. What's the duty that the people attending in the cabin, right? The flight attendants. What is their duty, right? I mean, clearly, it's not to serve drinks, right? Though that is essentially how people have come to think of flight attendants today, right? Their duty is to get everyone on and off the plane in an orderly fashion. Their duty is to ensure that all of the safety regulations are followed, and that in the event of an emergency, their duty is to make sure that the people have the best chance to survive as possible, right? As I understand it, that's how we should think of flight attendants. Yeah. So it seems to me that there's a way to do one's duty that doesn't involve rushing back into the plane to look for and drag out additional passengers, right? One could say, a flight attendant could say, I think convincingly, the plane is going down. I've made sure that all of the safety precautions that we can follow have been followed. Everyone is in as good a position as possible. If the plane crashes, I assist people to get off the plane in as calm and orderly fashion as possible. And now we are off the plane, and I have fulfilled my duty, right? It seems to me that to go back onto a plane when the status of the plane is sort of unknown, right? If things are going to just be as they have been, or if if there's going to be a fire, or things might explode, or whatever, that seems to me to be accepting even more risk, right? To put one's own safety, having just survived a crash, to then put one's safety into further question. And it seems to me then we could say this is not simply what someone does when one takes a job like this, right?
Yep.
So I think that that's kind of instructive, right? The job that one has to do has already been, we've fulfilled that, right? You're done. And then you say, I will do more, right? I'm going to try to help out further. That seems to me to be, when we're talking about what heroism is, there's a good example that helps us to think about heroism. Now, it might be the case that someone who trains for a job like this is in a better position to act heroically, right? You have that training, presumably. I don't know what a flight attendant's training involves, but presumably something along these lines. And certainly you've been thinking about, right, what you would do in such a situation, right, how you would act. And certainly, I mean, I guess flight attendants are more likely to be involved in an emergency situation on an aircraft than I am, right? They have a lot more takeoffs and landings than I do, and so they seem to be in a better position, perhaps, to act heroically. But that, as you say, that's no guarantee, right? Some may not even fulfill their duty, and those who do fulfill their duty may not feel compelled then to act heroically, going above and beyond the call of duty, as people say.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the idea that she had obviously thought about this happening before and probably been in drills and you know, had extensive discussions about what to do in this situation helped her in that situation. So that makes us think about what a heroic act is and what it's made up of, I think, and that's the bulk of where we wanted to talk today, I think. So without the crash, there's no heroism.
Right. And this is so I wrote a little bit about this, and so I guess, I mean, it's my job as a blogger to reference my blog, right? So hey, go read my blog post. But I wrote about what I think is a sort of fairly straightforward way of understanding this, right? This is the idea of heroism as emergent, right? That as you say, context of situation is critical. There's no heroism on a flight that takes off from Detroit and lands in L.A. And everyone is served their peanuts and their Diet Coke, and they get on and they get off, and the flight goes somewhere else, right? There's no heroism there. Now there's the potential that every person on that plane is as my friend Michael Tofius wrote to me, a latent hero, right? There's the potential for all of those people, or for any one of them, to act heroically. But if the situation doesn't arrive, then that heroism remains latent.
Yeah.
And there's no heroism doesn't happen.
And that's the hero in waiting idea from Zeno Franco and Phil Zimbardo. Their idea that everyone has the potential to be a hero. They're just waiting for the situation. So the situation's obviously, or the instance of needing heroism or seeing a need for heroism is the first part, the first step. And then I have kind of stumbled into the second part already, I think, is that you have to perceive that need. And I think that gets forgotten a lot, and that's what I try to tell kids, especially in my presentations, is that it's easy for us to be in our own little bubbles, walking around not seeing the need for action. Obviously, you're going to notice the need in a plane crash, but it's not always that obvious, right? And so the incident or the situation needs to arise. You need to observe it, and then the next part is, I think, where it starts getting interesting, and it starts being something that I think we can teach. So I think there's a lot of factors involved in the next part, and who gets involved and how they get involved and why they get involved. But I think that's ultimately it. It's the situation. It's people seeing it, and then someone acting. That right. Heroism arising.
That's right, and that's where you and I spend the majority of our time, right? I mean, when we're both educators, Yeah, and so what we're interested in is that kind of preparatory work that leads people to recognize um, that their heroism, can go from latent to emergent. That there is now a situation that has arisen that calls for action. And I think that there's not a lot of people. I don't think there are a lot of people talking about that first step because there's nothing, because it's thoroughly contingent, right? There's nothing that one can do to push the situation. Yeah. And that of course is what we were talking about on the Lost episode of the Hero Report when we talked about the conclusion of the George Zimmerman trial. For all the people who missed the Lost episode of the Hero Report, which is everyone except us. Because of course that's precisely what he was trying to do, and that's where people go wrong. Yeah, you can't go out and force a situation so that you can act heroically. Causing a confrontation, going around looking for a situation that requires a hero so that you can be that hero is very, very problematic. The situation is something you can't control. It doesn't have to be a plane crash or a child drowning or something like that. But those are, I think, instructive, right? Think of the example of the child drowning, which is the classic example of altruism or pro-social behavior or heroism or whatever we want to call it. Everyone thinks that if you're someone who jumps in to the lake to save the child who's drowning, then you've done something heroic, right? But nobody thinks that you're heroic if you first threw the child in.
Right.
Right? I mean,
right. You created the situation.
It's very, very clear that these situations arise organically. They don't arise as a result of you doing something so that you can then act. Now, they might arise because you've done something, right? Obviously, I mean, human action causes all sorts of things to happen, but it cannot be so that you say, my purpose is, to be a hero today, right? I woke up this morning and thought, I'm going to be a hero today. So every chance I got, I saw someone standing on a street corner, I saw a bus coming, I kind of nudged the person into the street, That's whatever comes from that is not going to be heroic, right? You might save the person, but what you've done is irreparably tainted by the fact that you caused it.
Well, we saw that about a month ago, maybe a bit more than a month. I think that it was like 19 years old, maybe, who kidnapped a girl in order to save her, and it didn't work out as he had hoped. But that's an example, a prime example. Someone who wanted to be a hero, so they fabricated a situation to act heroically. Right. So getting to the part where the person acts. One of the things that I've seen in the conversations you've had this week on your blog is has to do with I want to say skills, but I think skills. Let's go with that. So some of the skills that are required in heroism are obviously situational, but that if you're jumping in to save someone from drowning in a raging river, you don't want me jumping in because I'm not a strong swimmer. And I'm unlikely to jump in because I'm not a strong swimmer. It seems there's a very small chance of me being successful there, and I'm very aware of it. But there are other examples as well. But just because I can't swim, that doesn't make me unable to be heroic. What it means is that I'm unlikely to be heroic in that situation. It's not the skill that makes the person heroic, it's the action, right? And I think that goes with this plane crash as well, is that person had training, had certain skills and knowledge that enabled her to act the way that she did. It doesn't take away from her heroism, it doesn't inform her heroism, but it's a reality, I think.
Right. but this is also why you and I we had a whole podcast, I think, where we talked about things you could do to prepare yourself, right? And this is why we talk a lot about sort of priming people for heroic action, and that can take a number of different tacks, right? It can be something like, you talk about how you think about sort of situations that might come up and think about what you might do, right? If I'm remembering the example correctly, it's when you looking at all the exits very seriously in movie theaters, and sort of thinking about how you would get to them and how you would be on, and so on. And we started talking about this in the aftermath of the shooting in Colorado, I guess a little over a year ago now. So it can take that kind of form, or it can take the form of first aid training, right? So you say, look, I've never found myself in a situation where I would need to perform CPR. Thank goodness, because I don't know CPR, right? So in order to prepare myself, I go and take a course, right? I attempt to learn CPR so that if this situation were to arise, I'm in a different position then, and I'm better able to act. I'll feel more comfortable doing it, and therefore I'm more likely to do it.
Yeah, and I've used that idea of first aid training before in talking to audiences. It's something that you do in case you ever need to use it, and you're more than likely never going to need to use it, but if you need to, you're going to be very happy that you spent that time doing it, right? But
right.
We don't think that way often. We're not a very prepared group of people, really. Or as a people, we're not very well prepared for the future. We don't think about the future. We don't prepare for it very well.
Which is funny when you think about some of the fascination, for example, with the zombie apocalypse, right? There's a lot of talk over the last few years about the zombie apocalypse and all this business. There have been movies and television shows and books, and sometimes movies about books, and yet, that hasn't convinced anybody that they should, learn anything that might actually prepare themselves. I think the people who are actually prepared for some of the for some of the things that might happen are kind of like a fringe survivalist wingnuts, right? I mean, these are the people who could come to my assistance if I need to. I presume that these survivalists know exactly how to help someone who's been shot or whatever. And I think that's kind of fascinating, right? There's very few of us regular folks who take these sorts of courses or who think very seriously about some of these prospects, right? Because we don't like to think about these stressful, dangerous kinds of situations, and because generally we think to ourselves we're very sort of safe and happy, and these terrible things are unlikely to happen to us.
Yeah, they happen to someone else, and so that's why we don't learn how to rescue someone from falling into an ice lake, or we don't learn what's involved in a car accident. If a car's on fire or when it's going to be on fire. So so when we're in those situations, it's we're less likely to act.
Right, and this obviously has all sorts of implications for this concept of latent heroism, or heroes in waiting, right? You're actually less likely a hero in waiting if you don't have any of this preparatory work done, right? Now, it might still be the case that look, I might have no training in whatever, and a situation might arise, and I just act instinctively and succeed, right? But the odds of that are much lower than they would be if I was actually prepared, in a serious way for a situation like this. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Anyone can be a hero. Just it is going to depend on the situation. It can depend on things as it can depend on what you were thinking about earlier that day, or it could depend on what happened to you earlier that day, or a relationship that you made 5 years ago with someone could be the determining factor in whether you help another person today. It's there's so much involved, and I think that's where, you know, the presentation I've been giving most recently is on the various effects of the bystander issue, the various pressures involved, or the psychological barriers, and the awareness of those things can obviously help. Just being aware of why you're not acting can help you get over that hurdle. But I think, and we've talked about this, we had a whole episode, I think, on the bystander effect, and wondered aloud why there isn't bystander training for everyone. You know, it's starting in school, but it should be happening throughout life, really. Just knowing why we don't help, because we see these situations over and over again. I mean, it seems every week there's a video of someone being pulled off a subway station, and really it might be that the prominence of those videos is helping make them more regular, right?
Yeah. This is a serious question, although it might not sound that way. Did excuse me, did this many people fall onto subway tracks in the past and we just didn't have access to information the way that we do now? Or are people much clumsier now than they used to be?
Oh, I think it's the prevalence of video sharing sites. I mean, that's what it is. People are able to A, take video while it's happening, while they're not helping, but B, people can get the footage from the security cameras and put them online very easily. That's what it is, and it's the same with, I think, it's the same with all these sorts of things. Teenage suicide is something I talk about, or not talk about, but reference often, and that seems like it's a plague happening at the moment, but I doubt that it's much higher. It's just that we get to see every single one of them, and the media loves that story, so every time there's an opportunity to tell it, they tell it.
So you think that if we went back to like 1984, 1985, and we looked at the newspapers in Washington and New York and Chicago or whatever, people are falling on the tracks all the time?
Oh, I think so, and
Okay.
but I don't know that we would be getting reported in the newspaper.
Really?
Yeah, because it's happening. Well, I mean, we're seeing many more videos of people falling onto the tracks than we hear of anyone dying on the tracks. I mean,
Right.
we must be able to Google how many deaths there are on subway tracks, but there's a stupid number of people falling onto subway tracks. I mean, it's bizarre how many people.
So you think in the past someone would fall onto the tracks, get rescued, and it would not be news?
Right.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Okay.
Because I think what happens is that people are able to share that event quickly with each other. I'm trying to think there was some celebrity who rescued someone in New York from stepping in front of a bus.
It's Ryan Gosling. It's always Ryan Gosling.
It's always Ryan Gosling, right? So, you know, that would never have been news if it wasn't for this person being able to put it on Twitter and get retweeted and get picked up. I mean, the stuff that's happening, the videos that we see of people falling on subway tracks, they're just getting spread really quickly, and it happens with those subway. When someone rescues someone, there's people around who say, "My God, you should listen to what I just saw," or you know that, and they track the person down, and that's how it happens. That wouldn't have happened pre-internet. I mean, there's no way for that to be communicated so quickly.
Right, but do you also think that we just are more interested in heroism now than we were 30 years ago?
No, I don't think so. I think we're more interested in the 30-second thrill videos. I think that's what it is. It's an instant gratification. So 2013, January 23, 2013, there were already 6 subway deaths in New York City. The city was on pace for 100 deaths in the year, twice as many as the year before. So there's 50 deaths on New York subways that we don't hear about.
So people are also getting clumsier in addition.
Well, I don't know that that's the case. I mean, I haven't got historical.
Well, just from one year to the next.
Well, but that's that's extrapolating a year based on the first 23 days of the year. So
that's a bad 23 days. Let me take this in maybe a little bit different of a direction. I'm sort of curious about if we can spend a little bit more time talking about sort of why these examples that we keep talking about are heroic, or why they're not. And I think when we talked about the flight attendants, I think we made that sort of clear, right? You have a job to do, and that job might involve some risk, right? And you execute that as you're supposed to, but then you assume additional risk on top, right? You go back to do more. And this I want to suggest is what differentiates someone who's simply doing his job from someone who is doing something heroic. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Yep. I think right, and I think there's places where something might be heroic for one person, but not the same action would not be heroic for another person.
Okay.
And I think the jumping in to save someone, a kid who's drowning in a lake, say, or a pond, is not heroic for a lifeguard, but it might be heroic for me, who might drown in the process of trying to rescue someone.
Right. Right.
Exact same action, but different person. Yeah.
Now, I mean, what if you're a lifeguard who is not lifeguarding at the time?
Same deal. The reason that I said lifeguard was because of the skills involved, not because of the duty.
I see. So this is interesting. I want to sort of probe this. I'm glad that we're going down this. This is exactly what I wanted to probe. Because, of course, we're talking about sort of military heroes. And I think this is, in some sense, a different category. But in another sense, it kind of fits because there's a skill there as well, right? Now, military heroes, generally we think of them as taking one form today. That is, of course, the military hero who risks his or her life for other people, right? But there's, of course, a long-standing tradition that I talk about in my book of military heroes who are just very good at being soldiers, right? Who are great warriors. We don't talk about that very often because it's a little bit uncomfortable, right? Because what they're doing is excelling at hurting other people, not helping. But that is the skill that they're being trained for, right? They've picked up that skill. They've been taught to harm others better than, for example, I could. Yeah. So if I went to a war zone as myself today, I would be unsuccessful, right? I would not do very well at aiming and firing a gun and killing someone, let alone a lot of people. But someone who has the proper training could be very good at it. And at the same time, someone else who has the proper training might not be good at it at all, right? You could imagine a soldier who's very good at walking around holding a gun, but doesn't hurt anybody. Yeah, is in a firefight and doesn't succeed in harming any of the enemies. Yeah, that I think clearly we would say is not a battlefield hero, right? Simply being on a battlefield doesn't make you a hero. Yeah, but being good at it, right? Being on a battlefield and succeeding. Yeah, is that heroic?
Well, right. That comes down to your historical definitions again, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, classically, right? There's a classical archetype of heroism that says undoubtedly, right? A very good warrior, right? Someone who is capable of inflicting a lot of damage on the enemy, is a battlefield hero, and there are sort of two reasons for it, right? The one is, of course, that particular skill set executed incredibly well. Yeah, that's one. But two is, of course, every enemy that's wounded or killed is an enemy who's not wounding or killing my comrades and I.
Right.
Right. I should say my comrades and me. My goodness. And so in some sense, the battlefield hero does have a little bit of that helping behavior associated, although we don't like to think of it, right? Because it's being done not selflessly. It's not someone who throws himself in front of a hail of bullets or picks up the live grenade and throws it away from the team or whatever, right? Which is what we like. That makes us the most comfortable, right? This is someone who has impressive skill as a warrior, and as a consequence of that, is able to limit casualties on our side.
Yeah, I think that's hard to prove, I think, as an individual, whether or how many lives you're saving by killing other people. And maybe that's part of the issue, but certainly the public attitude has changed, and I think that's where we get into murky waters, I suppose, in defining heroism. But maybe that's why we're trying to do it, because I think really that it was clear 100 years ago what a hero was. Just World War I, that's what a hero was doing. You wouldn't have described someone rescuing a cat from a tree as a hero 100 years ago. But today, that the word is available for everyone, and there's a lot of people that will defend someone's right to call anyone a hero, and I think that's damaging. I mean, I think it takes away a lot. It takes away our opportunity to really admire those people, to prepare to be those people. I think so.
Right. Well, and
yeah.
that's why, you know, if I'm being honest with you, Matt, I don't. So the definition, for example, I think that Zeno Franco and Phil Zimbardo put forward in at least in a piece that I've read, I think it's actually too narrow.
Lost you.
Right. I find that it narrows. Right. What's that?
I lost you for a minute. You think the definition is too narrow?
I'm back. Well, yeah, they narrow it in a way that I expect them to, right? Theirs is pro-social. Theirs is helping, right? For them, heroism has to have a risk component. It has to have kind of a sacrifice component, but it also has to have a helping pro-social component. And for me, because I return to classical philosophy, my sense is that can be one kind of heroism, but that it's important to recognize that there are other kinds of heroism too. That way we're not cutting off the conversation and saying, if you didn't help somebody specifically, you're not a hero, right? You could still very well be a different kind of hero, yeah? Just as there were, and that's why I think there was so much less confusion in the past than there is now. Because what do you say about the soldier who kills 25 of the enemy who were trying to kill him and all of his comrades, and he did it, very, very well, and everybody says, give this guy a medal, he's a war hero. Well, that's why we have the term war hero, right? You don't have to be a war hero who saved another guy, right? I think that if we could go back to thinking about things that way, we would simplify stuff for ourselves. We would reduce some of the confusion if we recognize that there are several different kinds of heroism, and that the one that we like the best today is the one that's pro-social, right? The helping behavior, right? The one that is other regarding, yeah. That's the one we prefer because it's quite hard to do. And because it always just looks good, right? There isn't some kind of ugliness potentially attached to it. When you jump onto the subway tracks and lift up the other person, you're not doing it. It doesn't harm anybody else to do it. You're not doing it because you hope someone will give you a cash reward or whatever else, right? You're not doing it to make yourself look good. You simply, the situation arose and you reacted, yeah, to the benefit of someone else. But there are also other situations that arise where you can be particularly excellent, but that that don't benefit somebody else.
So, where would you see that happening today? Outside, well, where would you see that happening outside of a war zone?
Well, I mean, I think that's obviously the easiest example, right? But the other example that I talked about a lot is in the book, of course, is the enduring hero, right? The one who suffers, and who nonetheless is suffers in some sense for a principle, and is unwilling to make his or her lot in life easier. Usually at the expense of someone or something else. Yeah. Are there examples of this? I could spend some time thinking about them. I didn't. My notes aren't prepared for me here. But of course, the example, the example that I always use, the classical example is Odysseus, right? Who suffers and suffers in order to get home. And I think that there are some contemporary examples. I always give the example of John McCain. Now, this is in some sense, this is a war example, but in another sense, it's not really, right? He's out of the war at that time, and he could have done other than he did, right? He could have collaborated. He could have accepted early release, all of these sorts of things. He could have traded on his father's name and position, but he refused to do that. Because the principle of first man in is the first man out, right? I think you see this all the time. Think about anybody who's imprisoned anywhere in the world for political beliefs, for example, right? Think of all the Amnesty International prisoners of conscience. What is it about these people that makes them? This is a great example, actually. What makes Nelson Mandela heroic?
Right. Well, right. Yeah, absolutely true. And Aung San Suu Kyi and right.
Right. These are, they're heroes because they endure an incredible amount of suffering and privation for a principle: equality, democracy. I think that these are great. Thank goodness that I spent 5 seconds talking about it and not simply saying I didn't have examples. Because I think these are great examples, and I think nobody would say. I don't think that it's very clear that Mandela is doing this for someone else, right? Because that's at that point. He's in prison for more than 25 years, right? Like, so any image of helping a particular person or particular people, it's really challenging at that point. There's a principle that keeps him going.
Well, but he's certainly helping. His goal was to help the people that were oppressed in South Africa, right? There was a group of people.
Sure, no doubt, right? But that's like saying, he wanted to help millions, right?
Yeah.
And I think that when you get to that point, that's about a principle more than individual people.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's, and then I think there's another two types there that fall into that, the pro-social heroism, where it is someone that we've talked about a lot here, that situation where it's over in 20 minutes or an hour or 6 seconds or whatever it might be. There's clearly that person was the right person at the right time in the right place. But then someone like Irina Sendler, or a lot of the Holocaust rescuers who did this every day for a long period of time, there's something different there, right?
Yes.
There's something. There's almost something enduring there as well,
yes.
And almost. Like that person, those people have almost decided, I'm going to die for this. That must be how they lived every day. Someone like Wesley Autry, who jumps onto the subway track, makes that decision, goes home with his kids, and that was that. But someone who's doing it day after day, with clear risk, and this, I think this applies to sacrifice as well. If there's a clear sacrifice, that person, there's something else going on. There's something clearly different going on there, right?
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, that becomes an occupation, right? Right. Your heroism becomes something. It becomes something of a job or a second life or something like that, right? You're doing whatever it is you're doing in your daily life, but secretly, quietly, you're also doing this, this rescuing. And I guess what I want to say is of course that this idea of a sort of ongoing heroism, right? I think is clearly different from the heroism of the moment, even though it might have started with just a heroism of the moment, right? You might have said, I'm going to help this one person, what else can I do? And then the next person came along, right? And the next, and the next, and then eventually, it becomes sort of part of who you are and what it is that you do. So I think that those two things may be connected, but they might not be, right? I mean, you might. But I should also say, and I think that this is really critical, this is a very important point of my book, it's all about mortality, right? I think, and I wish we could do a study. I wish we had someone who had a huge amount of money that they wanted to pour into this, because in truth, I think this is something that's really deserving of in-depth psychological study. I would be absolutely fascinated to talk to people about their understanding and appreciation of their mortality, because I think that heroes have a different appreciation of the fact of their mortality than do people who don't act heroic, than do bystanders, right? That ultimately, if I could have two groups, heroes and bystanders, and I could talk to them about, or someone with actual training in psychology, could talk to them about their understanding of death, I think we would find radically different things, right? Even not just people who do this in the long term, right? Someone who says, I'm going to die for this over time, right? But I'm still going to do this. Also people in the moment, people who act in the moment. I'm convinced of it. I don't have any proof, but I'm convinced of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the other thing, the last thing maybe that we could discuss here is this idea, and again we've talked about it before, but I think it really applies here, is the idea that maybe we shouldn't be calling people heroes broadly, that they are heroes at that time, because that person that dives in to save someone who's drowning, are they a hero in 2 years' time? Are they a hero in 20 years' time? And then the same goes for, a Holocaust rescuer. Were they a hero when it was happening for the year that they were doing it, and then 10 years later, would you still call them a hero? Are they a hero when they haven't done anything heroic for 10 years?
Yeah, and I talk with people about this all the time. Again, I'll bring up the John McCain example, right? He's such a good example because he's not really a hero to very many people now, right? John McCain, the politician of the last, let's say, 5 years, has not seemed particularly heroic. He's been, he's taken a number of positions that are opposite of positions he took in the past on controversial issues. He seems to be willing to do whatever it takes to stay in office, going wherever the political winds of Arizona buffet him, right? This doesn't say anything, I think, about the heroic endurance he displayed in Vietnam, right? You cannot look back on that heroism today with the lens of McCain today and say, so he's not a hero then, right? Absolutely, he was a hero then. But if we think carefully about heroism, we should also recognize that he would be the kind of person today who would take slippery political positions so that he could keep himself in office, right? That ultimately, someone who is able to endure that kind of suffering and hardship, survival is something that he's focused on, right? And he'll find ways to survive. We might not like those ways in other contexts, right? But so we might not think of him as heroic now. but he certainly was heroic then. Yeah. Now, for some people, his heroism then still speaks today, and on some issues, it might. Right? When the Senate is debating torture, it might be that people look to McCain, right, for leadership, for guidance on this issue, and he has been unflaggingly good, right? I don't know that it's heroic because I mean, he's someone who suffered from torture, right? So he says, look, don't torture people. And I don't know if that's a heroic position to take. It's unquestionably the right position, but I don't know if it's heroic. But some people say, well, he did something so impressive, I'll always think of him as very impressive.
I guess and I think the question I'm interested in is and especially with the idea of training, is Wesley Autry, who clearly risked his life to save someone else, someone that I want to have by my side all the time because I know if I have trouble, he's going to risk his life to save me, or how situational was that? How much was it that he was the right person at the right time? And I think, what I see a lot in my Google alert emails are stories of so-and-so who was a hero now arrested for something. And every time I look at it, I mean, it's usually some small time something. They did something good, and a lot of times I wouldn't even necessarily define it as heroism, but it seems to be a story that people tell. So I wonder, that makes me think, is it something inside someone? Is it that each of us has a different level of latent heroism, or is it just completely dependent on the situation? And is that person next time going to be heroic, or are they going to be a bystander? Is there a chance that they would ever be a bystander again once they've done something heroic, I wonder?
That'd be another great study, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Right? Because, you have a lot of human history you could go through. It would really be sort of fascinating to see if there are people who used to be heroes and then later became bystanders, or vice versa, right? People who are bystanders in one instance and in another instance acted heroically. And I think that that would tell us something about sort of latent heroism and how much situation matters. That would seem to suggest that situation is critical.
Well, I think bystanders, someone who was a bystander at one point who resisted heroism is more likely to be heroic the next time because they have time to reflect on it, right?
Yeah, but not the other way around, right?
No, it's easier one way and not the other.
Yeah.
It seems that someone who acts heroically would be more likely, but I wonder how that works, and I wonder if we really will ever know how that works. That's a tough question.
Well, and ultimately, I think it's one for the behavioral psychologists, right? I mean, I can theorize about it all the live long day, and once we know what happens, we can both educate about it. But in terms of the study, we need people who are experts to really get into this level of in-depth heroic research that I think we're pointing toward. But it seems to me that this is the kind of thing that would undoubtedly find a home in psychology departments in the university, and where I think a lot of really interesting research could be done.
Yeah, if only there was an event with a lot of psychologists interested in heroism coming up that we could convince them to do this.
Oh, wait. Why don't you show us that T-shirt one more time?
Hero Roundtable, November 9th and 10th, people.
Yeah. Tickets are going fast.
They are. I had a school today wanting to book 2 more sets of tickets, so we're actually having a press conference on Thursday to announce the conference to Michigan. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. I've never been part of a press conference before. Will
you be shaving for that press conference?
I expect to, yeah. I expect to be over my jet lag and thinking shaving is worth doing.
Yeah, for those people who are not watching but who are instead listening, Matt is growing a little bit of I think we'll call it a jet lag beard.
That is what it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, I think that for our first episode back from hiatus, this has been chock full of interesting things to talk about. Hopefully, there'll be some people who listen or watch who will be engaged enough to have some conversation with us about it. You can always reach us, obviously, on Twitter at TheHeroCC or at Ari. You can find us on our websites. Mine is, of course, cohenari.net. And Matt, where do you want people to find you?
Well, I think they can come here to HeroReport.com and leave comments. That's probably.
Oh, absolutely. So thanks, Matt. This was it's very good to have you back. I've been, as I say, I've been talking to the walls about heroism lately.
Well, I'm glad I can save you from the walls. We'll make sure we do this again next week, post press conference.
Terrific. Yeah, I'll be looking for. Hopefully, it'll be streaming online.
Hopefully.
Well, thanks, Matt, and thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time on the Hero Report. Take care.
Goodbye.